من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد فإن خير الحديث كتاب الله وخير الهدي هدي محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وشر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار ربي اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي اللهم انفعنا بما علمتنا وعلمنا ما ينفعنا وزدنا علما اللهم ربنا زدنا علما اللهم أرنا حقيقة الأشياء كما هي اللهم أرنا الحق حقا وارزقنا اتباعه وأرنا الباطل باطلا وارزقنا اجتنابه آمين يا رب العالمين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. I hope everybody is well. Um, I believe this is our sixth session today, if I'm not mistaken, sixth day, session number 1. And we will look to conclude Surah Al-Baqarah today, hopefully. We are in the third juz. Um, we are starting the 34th ruku today. And we're going to be starting with the passage which talks about Ayatul Kursi, right? So we have spoken about most of the second half of Surah Baqarah now as well. I'm not going to go over the distribution. I will talk about the distribution of the second half, the address to Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, after the change of Qibla has taken place, the change of address takes place. And with that change of address, all that is necessary for a people of scripture to know so as to really fulfill the role of that scripture and develop that genuine community is taken up with respect to aspects of rituals, meaningful rituals being highlighted, with respect to aspects of social dealings being highlighted, with respect to aspects of community service, community building in the way or in the form of a social cause are also highlighted, right? So these three dimensions that we spoke about when we spoke about Ayatul Bir, that of faith, Iman, right? That of a social endeavor, a social effort, a meaningful cause that you've taken up within the society. And the third being meaningful rituals themselves, right? So with these three, you find that the second half of Surah Baqarah alternates with each of them, right? And then, of course, there is a very important fourth dimension in which your social dealings are highlighted as well, in speaking about divorce and related issues, and very importantly, as will be the subject today, for the most part of the passages today, dealing with economic issues. And we spoke about the analogy of a rope as to how the strands of a rope are wound together. You see these subjects or these themes in the second half intertwined with each other. Now, over here in the 34th ruku, just before Ayatul Kursi, the ayah speaks about spending in the way of Allah. Again, that social cause that you speak about, or that's important, the community building, that dimension of community building, empowering the people of society who are vulnerable, that finds two ways. One way of empowering people that are vulnerable is to give to them sadaqat, right? You spend to empower them, to help them get out of whatever tight spots they may be in. Fair enough. But then another way of empowering them is to ensure that the community or the society that they're living in, the um, the general principles of justice in that community are such that they're not exploitative, that they're not abusive, and that requires that struggle. And that struggle, which at that particular time in Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam struggle, took the form of qital fi sabilillah, right? Fighting in the way of Allah. So this passage begins with an exhortation to spend in the way of Allah. Um, and spending in the way of Allah is in both of these ways, with respect to directly to the people who are in need, and then, of course, to the cause itself, so that eventually the cause, uh, if it leads to the believers prevailing, or the if it leads to the truth prevailing, justice would ensue. And the exploitation and abusiveness would be curtailed. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا أنفقوا مما رزقناكم. So you who have believed, spend from what we have provided you. من قبل أن يأتي يوم, before there comes a day, لا بيع فيه, where there will be no exchange, ولا خلة ولا شفاعة, there will be no friendship nor any intercession. وَالْكَافِرُونَ هُمُ الظَّالِمُونَ, and it is the disbelievers who are zalim, who are unjust. It is this zulm that they're doing in the society. It is the zulm that they're doing with themselves by not recognizing that it is this effort that has to be put in, which is going to be a means of salvation on the day of judgment. Why would you not spend? Why would you not give? Why would you not look to do more and more? Is if you have some wishful conceptions of the day of judgment, that there will be some way for you to barter your way out, or some way for you that your friendships or kinships or mentorships or whatever ships uh, will bail you out, or some sort of intercession will take place specially for you, and ultimately you will be in paradise. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reasserts that stop singing yourself those lullabies. Your efforts, how about banking on those? Your spending, how about increasing yourself in there rather than reinforcing the wishful beliefs? And the question arises, and the question has arisen earlier as well within the surah. Why do you do that? Why do you put yourself through this? Why should you spend? Why should you struggle? Why should you have to bear through suffering, so much loss, the hope, the naqs min al-amwali wal-anfusi wal-thamarat? Why bear through all of that? So yes, people should be empowered. People should be, there should be justice. They should not be exploited. But the effort that it takes and the pain that goes into all of this, why should one subject themselves to this to begin with? Why not let it be? It is the way it is, right? This is the way of the world. People are always subjected to injustices. Why not ensure that I am not exploited, I am not abused, and I worry about that? And really, that in itself is a lifetime's effort to ensure that I don't get exploited and my interests are secure. And for the most part, that is the way of life for most of humanity, that you invest your time, your energies, your talents, so as to secure your self-interest, so as to ensure that you're not vulnerable. Now, to invest that or some portion of that time so that others are not vulnerable, so that others' interests are secure at the highest level, why would you want to do that? I mean, why would you want to take up that pain on yourself, knowing that it's going to be incredibly painful, knowing that the struggle is not easy at all, knowing that all kinds of hardships are going to be thrust your way, knowing that the doors that you open up on that path of your own inner evil coming out are so many. And that within your comfort zone and just fending for yourself is so risk free, or at least the risk there is very minimal. Why not just do that? So there's a two-part answer to this question. The first part of the answer is that because Allah deserves it, because Allah is Ilah, the only Ilah. Allahu la ilaha illa hu. Allah, there is no ilah other than him. So that's the first part of the answer right there. Why go through all of that? For him. But then saying that he's ilah and not having much of an idea as to what ilah means, it doesn't really leave us anywhere. What does it mean that he is ilah? And we grow up with this understanding, La ilaha illallah. This is our baptism, right? This is our initiation within Islam. La ilaha illallah, ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. Right? The first phrase, wa ashhadu anna Muhammad Rasulullah, but before that, la ilaha illallah. And that's the earliest memory we have of our initiation within Islam. This was supposed to be that passport to paradise. And we've been saying it for so long, and then we translate it into our own respective languages, whatever we feel best. No one worthy of worship other than him. No one worthy of worship other than him. No one worthy of worship other than him. No one. What does it mean to us? What does ilah signify for me? Is my understanding of ilah significant enough or sufficient enough or personal enough to pull me through all the difficulties along that path, that I say to myself, yes, the pain is worth it. Yes, it is worth the sacrifice. Yes, it is worth spending or risking a good chunk of my life, for some people, the entirety of their lives, and pretty much risking everything or a whole lot of things, and may not even have a lot to show for it towards the end of it. Quite possible. What's the answer to what ilah means to you should be such that when you ask yourself these questions, it is sufficient of a response to the why, to the why do this at all. And so as we grow older and as we delve deeper into what ilah means or can mean, there's at least three different dimensions in which this meaning comes in. And I believe I picked this up. I learned this from Dr. Israr Ahmad rahimahullah. I believe he picked it up from Maulana Maududi rahimahullah. And of course, where he picked it up, I don't know, but I'm sure it was the way our traditional tafsir and texts speak about ilah. And he would talk about it in three ways. That one understanding or one connotation of ilah is the one who is intensely loved. And you would use the phrase wale hana muhabbat, um, which is a phrase in Urdu to mean passionate love. The second category that he would speak about is one who everyone turns to and relies upon, right? And then he would give a usage of that word in Arabic, um, something to do with the dependency of uh, a goat child on the the mother goat, something to that effect. I don't remember that, but how everyone turns to him, is dependent upon him, relies upon him. And then the third meaning, or the third area that he would speak about is, um, so he would say that the first one is the description of ilah that you find with the mystics or the Sufiya. The second meaning is what you would find for as the common understanding for the general public, for everyone to relate with. And the third would be what he would call the understanding of the philosophers. And the understanding of the philosophers was that ilah is the one who baffles the mind, who you can't really encompass in your understanding. So these three connotations or implications, we take them further. We speak about ilah being the one who is worthy of love, the most worthy of love. And we bring to our mind all the attributes of Allah's beauty. We bring to mind all the attributes that depict His Jamal, that depict His grace, that depict His love. And when you put all of those attributes together in your conception of ilah, and you do come to something of a gnosis, a recognition of his beauty, then his beauty is such, should be such, that it motivates you, it compels you, it is reason enough for you to push against everything else. That my loving him is a reciprocation of his love for me, for his grace for me. My loving him is because of how beautiful he is. And he really is. He is worthy of all of these efforts, of all of this sacrifice, of all of this struggle, of all of the pain. And pain in a physical sense, a psychological sense, and a spiritual sense. He's worth all that pain. A conception of the beauty of Allah that looks at the ayat of Allah in the Quran, before the Quran, outside of the Quran, and reflects upon them in prayer, as in salah, the ritual prayer itself, or simply the attitude of prayer, actually, and the attitude of prayer as a what Allama Iqbal would call the mystic observer of nature, reflecting upon the beauty of Allah. And I am able to pick up from that reflection and from that act of prayer over all of those ayat that, you know what, he's the one. And that my love for him, because understand, the one you love, the one you choose to love, is going to be the source of your growth. Wherever, whoever is your greatest beloved is you giving yourself the greatest chance to rise up to your best and highest potential. What does it mean to love someone? What it means to love someone is that you appreciate them for their uniqueness. This takes on a whole new meaning when you talk about the uniqueness of Allah, because in recognizing him in his uniqueness, you recognize his individuality, yes, but then his individuality manifested with his attributes within creation itself and incorporates pretty much everything. And then who he can be, and who he can be with respect to a further expression of his divine potential. And is there something of a possibility that has been left for me to bring out that divine potential, to express that divine potential, to increase him in his perfection? Allahu Akbar, Allah is greater. Fakabbirullah, to exalt the greatness of Allah even more. And when you commit yourself to this kind of a love, then what this kind of love is doing for you is that now you have transcended your own self and the other, the uniqueness of the other, and the goals of the other have become yours. The other has become yours. Now you're extending beyond the confinements of your own unique self, your own individuality, your own limitations, to expand yourself. And that has this polarity that has developed, that has been identified for who I am right now and where I want to be in loving this person, this polarity, this distance, this journey, and then what I'm going to be when I get there or close to there in really having loved the other is where my growth is going to be. So the greater the polarity, the greater the other, the greater the scope that I have or the possibility that I have for my growth. And so, like I've said before, the one who loves Allah the most becomes rahmatan lil alameen. His personal growth is such that he has developed within himself the capacity to be a mercy for all worlds, for all people, for all creatures, everywhere, across time. He has the capacity to genuinely cry for people he has never met, for you and me. That capacity, that comes in from being able to embody divine love or love for the divine within you, such that his alameen you now have a very intimate relationship with. And where he wants to take this alameen, you are now a collaborator in that process. You're now a co-worker in that process. And in becoming a co-worker in that process, you're necessarily transcending yourself, going beyond yourself, elevating yourself. To have an ilah other than Allah is to limit that potential for growth, for stopping short along the way at anything within the alameen and not extending to the Rabbul Alameen would mean necessarily that you're excluding so much of the alameen and then so much of your own potential by limiting yourself thus. And so this has carried the person further away from self-interest, from self-love, whilst maintaining it at the same time. that when you extend yourself to the love of Allah, you realize that Him being the Rabbul Alameen, He's also your Rabb. And both the love for His Alameen and of course love for Him do not necessitate, do not mandate in any way self annihilation. That loving yourself becomes an important prerequisite. Absolutely only loving yourself becomes something that you have to purge yourself from and grow out of. Being able to do that is living up to your potential as a lover. So, who that beloved should be, the ultimate beloved, that is one meaning of ilah. Ilah as the most trustworthy, as the most reliable, as the one that everyone turns to for their du'as. Again, when we spoke about وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا أَشَدُّ حُبًّا لِلَّهِ, for the most part, that conversation was about this dimension of the uluhiyya of Allah, or our submission or our dedication and commitment towards Him as ilah, is when we're recognizing His power. So all the attributes of Allah's power, they come together. All the attributes of His jalal, they come together. And in coming to recognize that He is the most powerful, who can really sustain the weight of my being, of my personality, of my needs, more than anybody else can. And therefore turning to Him, therefore committing to Him, therefore relying upon Him. So if in recognizing Him as the one most worthy of my love, and in recognizing all His attributes of Jamal, of His beauty, I commit myself to His ibadah, in recognizing Him as the most worthy in terms of being most powerful, in recognizing His attributes of Jalal, I am committing myself to tawakkul upon Him alone. So where there was an Iyaka na'bud in the first part, there is an Iyaka nasta'in in the second understanding. The third, with due respect, I feel that just to connote or understand the divine or Allah as the one who baffles and the one you cannot understand is grossly inadequate within a philosophical conception of God. Because then the ununderstandable eventually becomes the unrelatable. And if He's unrelatable, then that's just impractical. Then how is it that my daily life, my commitments, struggles, sacrifice, find a motivation in Him being ilah when He is so incomprehensible, so distant, so unrelatable? The greatness of Allah's uluhiyya within that within that scope, or within that dimension of understanding, that intellectual dimension, is precisely how from His being the most worthy of love, from Him being the most worthy of trust, ibadah and tawakkul, respectively, He is the ultimate source of meaning. As transcendent as He is, the more we get to know Him, the more we know how much more there is to know. Despite all of that, what we know is substantial. And everything we do know, whatever truths we have discovered, encountered, even created as active inquirers or an active community of inquirers, if we put Allah at the center of those truths, they make the most sense. They make reality the most understandable. They make my life the most understandable if it is put in perspective with Him as Allah, as Ilah. He is the ultimate source of meaning. So, as baffling as He may be, as batin as He may be, He is the most zahir at the same time. And all His attributes of truth, His attributes of justice, Him being al-haq, makes everything meaningful, makes everything sensible, makes everything intelligible, is finally the answer of it makes sense to struggle, to suffer in the ways that are necessitated. So when I say Allahu la ilaha illa hu, I have something, some understanding of who He is in at least these three different ways, so that I am more, I have that itminan, even if I still have that distress at all of what's required, at all of what is difficult. Al-Hayyul Qayyum, the ever living, the sustainer. Now, the hayat of Allah, as that manifestation of that power that we spoke about, again, the expression of His attributes of Jalal that make Him the most trustworthy, that make Him the one to whom we turn to for the one that we rely upon. Him being Al-Qayyum, the one who sustains everything, who's keeping everything qaim. Everything is qaim because He is qayyum. Right? So if I'm looking for my own qiyam, then having turned to pretty much everything and everything to keep me qaim and recognizing that they're at some level or the other, they prove themselves inadequate to keep me qaim. And that it is Al-Qayyum who was in fact, even through all of the other things that were keeping me qaim, He was the one behind all of that. It was Him being Al-Qayyum that was manifested through all of those experiences. And so relying upon Him. لا تأخذه سنة ولا نوم. The expression of His hayat, of Him being Al-Hayy, in that how He is completely above any need for sleep or drowsiness whatsoever. That any other hayat or any other life that I bank on, that I rely on, that I trust to give me life, ultimately drowsiness, sleep, and even death would overtake them, or the other manifestations of inadequacy, no matter who they are, and so they will not be able to hold me up. I'm literally relying, leaning against somebody to sustain me, to hold me, to keep me from falling. And they fall asleep on the job. Am I not going to fall? Am I not going to break? And then who's going to put Humpty Dumpty back together again? له ما في السماوات وما في الأرض. To him belongs all that is in the heavens and all that is on earth. Again, manifestations of his jalal, of his jamal as well. How the conversation within the ayah proceeds from his jalal, still talking about his jalal, but now starting to talk about his jamal as well, as it is obvious or as is seen within the samawat and ard, as is seen through what is in samawat and ard. So the one you turn to, the ilah, the one you're banking on and loving for your own growth, you see the ever expanding and the ever growing universe, the samawat and ard, as a manifestation of what he's capable of how beautiful you can turn out, given that you go through this process, that you commit to him. مَنْ ذَا الَّذِي يَشْفَعُ عِنْدَهُ إِلَّا بِإِذْنِهِ. It follows from this greatness, it follows from this power, it follows from this incredible beauty that he would be so transcendent, he would be so distant, he would be so removed from everything that goes around in this world that, why would he even care for what goes on? And if he doesn't care, if he's so far removed, detached, absolute, and the world is as insignificant as it is, why should he care? And so perhaps in order to access him, because he's so inaccessible now, other deities become important. Other humans become important. And in falling back and relying upon those humans and deities who will intercede for me before him, who somehow are able to overcome this unbridgeable gap between him and the world, since he's so transcendent and the world is so insignificant, there has to be these intermediaries who somehow, again, very ineffably, very incomprehensibly, they jump this gap. They can jump this gap. I can't jump this gap. It's too big of a gap. So my free miracle is going to be in banking on those deities, on those intercessors. Allah immediately falls or criticizes that heavily. He falls down on it very heavily. No, who dares intercede? That's not who I am. I'm not that far removed to be nonchalant or callous about what goes on. مَنْ ذَا الَّذِي يَشْفَعُ عِنْدَهُ إِلَّا بِإِذْنِهِ. So who dares, who is it that can intercede with him except with his permission? Yeah, if it does happen, it is not going to happen because he doesn't know or he's not aware. It is going to happen precisely for the opposite reason, that he does know, and that too very down to the last detail. Who will intercede and who will they intercede for? That's going to be his choice. That is going to be based out of his knowledge. He's not going to be informed by anybody else about what he did not know. because of his absence, detachment, or whatever. It is because he is giving that honor. يَعْلَمُ مَا بَيْنَ أَيْدِيهِمْ وَمَا خَلْفَهُم. His greatness, his absoluteness, his awesomeness, his incredibly incomprehensible, ineffable beauty and conception, and all of that, despite all of that, يَعْلَمُ مَا بَيْنَ أَيْدِيهِمْ وَمَا خَلْفَهُم. He is so intimate with each human being that he knows exactly what is in front of them, he knows exactly what is behind them. So there is no justification for these conceptions of these convenient conceptions of intercession and escaping the path of love or the struggle that love necessitates. وَلَا يُحِيطُونَ بِشَيْءٍ مِّنْ عِلْمِهِ إِلَّا بِمَا شَاءَ. And they encompass nothing of his knowledge except what he wants, except with his permission, except what he wants them to know. وَسِعَ كُرْسِيُّهُ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. His throne extends across the heavens and the earth. Again, the beauty and the majesty of his being ilah as it extends across the samawat and ard. وَلَا يَؤُودُهُ حِفْظُهُمَا. And he is not tired of continuously preserving them, always in actively engaged in preserving them, protecting them rather. وَهُوَ الْعَلِيُّ الْعَظِيمُ. And he is Al-Ali. He is the most high. And he is the most great. The most high in how you see his kursi, his throne, his dominion, his majesty extend across the heavens and the earth. And he is Al-Azim in how, actually, he is Al-Ali in how he is from his position of, 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 of height or superiority, keenly observing everything in front and behind, and Al-Azim in how his greatness is manifest throughout the majesty with which he has everything preserved and protected in the heavens and the earth. So, in trying to understand why do all of this, that's at least something of the first part of the answer. The second part of the answer, لا إكراه في الدين. There is no compulsion in religion. There is no compulsion in religion. So despite being Al-Ali, despite being Al-Azim, despite being Al-Hayy, despite being Al-Qayyum, despite being Ilah in all of these ways, he gives the human being a free choice. You want to do it, you do it. You don't want to do it, you don't do it. You have a choice in the matter. He wants you to come to him and respond to all of this willingly. You do this out of a freedom of your will, out of your own choice, for however much you want to. La ikraha fi din. There is no compulsion in religion. It is a free individual's choice that leads you to commit to this path. قَدْ تَبَيَّنَ الرُّشْدُ مِنَ الْغَيِّ. The right path has been made distinct from the wrong. Your choice, your call. And when an individual gets a choice to choose his master, he's no longer a slave. He's no longer a slave who can choose his master or who can choose his beloved. because to love is to be captivated, is to choose to enter into a captivity of the demands of your love. Once you have committed to love, then the demands are to be taken seriously and they do apply. And you have committed to them, you have accepted their bondage upon you. But you can always say no. You can always choose not to love. But then there will always be a default beloved in there somewhere. And that will have its implications on you. That's not going to, there's that space is not going to remain empty, even if it is for those most opposed to love or the most resistant to love. At the end of the day, there is going to be some level of self love, an incredibly vile degree of self love that is going to fill that space. And that is going to express itself as such. La ikraha fi din. So there is no compulsion in religion. That despite all of his greatness, his beauty, his majesty, his power, his jalal, his jamal, how meaningful he makes everything, you can still say no. And this free choice is the second reason why. Because taken up freely, it offers the greatest possible benefit. Taken up forcibly, it's forget it. Forget it. فَمَنْ يَكْفُرْ بِالطَّاغُوتِ. So whoever renounces taghut. Who are the taghut, or what are the taghut? Anything that has exceeded its limits. So exceeding its limits, not recognizing its confinements and claiming to be more than what it actually is. So in pretty much everything in creation, when it's claiming divinity, when it's claiming to be ilah or God, when an idol, that's idolatry. So those with their excessive limitations, when they are put in that place, they're excessively palpable limitations. Yet they're placed, those limitations, they're allowed to exceed, transgress, and they're put in the place of God. فَمَنْ يَكْفُرْ بِالطَّاغُوتِ. So whoever rejects these taghut, وَيُؤْمِن بِاللَّهِ, and believes in Allah. Who is Allah? Who, for all his majesty and all his beauty, is limitation free. But for all his love and all his immanence in giving the human being freedom, Allah has committed himself as well in this relationship, in this interaction, in becoming a co-worker with the human being. Subhanahu wa ta'ala, he has, although he didn't have to, he has freely chosen to engage. وَيُؤْمِن بِاللَّهِ. So when you believe, when you leave all the taghut and believe in Allah, فَقَدْ اسْتَمْسَكَ بِالْعُرْوَةِ الْوُثْقَى, he has grasped the most firm handhold. The one who does this, the one who holds on to Allah, realizes that the strongest, Allah is not going to let you go. He's not going to let you fall. He's not going to let you break. That ultimately, that is the source of the greatest strength you can possibly get, support you can possibly get, growth that you can possibly get. لَنْ فِصَامَ لَهَا. That is not going to break at all. وَاللَّهُ سَمِيعٌ عَلِيمٌ. Allah is hearing and knowing. So as the Ayatul Kursi talks about the greatness of Allah, the very next ayah talks about how despite that greatness, he is involved in the very, in his very immanence with each human being, in hearing, seeing, knowing. in collaborating, in supporting, in holding. That's the second reason why. Allahu waliyyu alladhina amanu. You turn to Allah, you believe in Allah, Allah becomes the wali. He becomes a friend. He is a friend to the people who have believed. He's going to bail them out. He's going to be there for them. He's going to protect them. يُخْرِجُهُم مِّنَ الظُّلُمَاتِ إِلَى النُّورِ. He is going to liberate them from all types of and all shades of darkness towards light. Again, to make sense of things, to give meaning to things, to make everything meaningful. That part, that representation of wilaya, of his friendship. وَالَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا. As for those who refuse to believe, أَوْلِيَاؤُهُمُ الطَّاغُوتِ. Their awliya, their friends are taghut, those limited conceptions, idols who have been placed to replace Allah. Anything from within the alameen, which has become absolute. أُولَٰئِكَ يُخْرِجُونَهُم مِّنَ النُّورِ إِلَى الظُّلُمَاتِ. They drag them from light into the depths of darkness. So, from knowing truth, from having truth, the Taghut have the potential of taking that truth or the light of that truth away from you. To make things more and more meaningless. You can have those experiences of meaningfulness. But Taghut and reliance upon Taghut and that relationship with Taghut to the exclusion of Allah will mean that layers and layers of darkness, confusion will necessarily be the case. More and more confusion, more and more darkness, more and more meaninglessness, less and less truth, less and less justice, less and less order, more and more chaos. أُولَٰئِكَ أَصْحَابُ النَّارِ. These are the companions of the fire. هُمْ فِيهَا خَالِدُونَ. And they will live therein forever. Moving right along, we did what we could in trying to cover the 34th ruku' with Ayatul Kursi and the aftermath. This relationship of Allah being ilah, and in being ilah, being the wali of those who take him up as their ilah, those who have that iman, that trust in him. And we continue from there to the 35th ruku, ayah number 258. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. ألم تر إلى الذي حاج إبراهيم في ربه. Haven't you considered the one who argued with Ibrahim alayhi salam about his Rabb? Now, when we talk about developing this iman in Allah as ilah in all of these ways that we spoke about, it isn't something that you just have. It isn't something that you just stumble upon. It isn't something just you're like, okay, from now on I'm going to have it. That's not how it works. It's a process, and there's a proper way, or it's better to call it a pathway. There's a better way of going along the path, going along the way, and then there's the way that that blocks that path. There's attitudes that block that path. First, we get an idea of a person who is defiantly disobedient, and his argumentation is such that he's just contentious for the sake of it. He's just argumentative for the sake of it. And then there's for the sake of something vested, for the sake of something hidden, which is going to be shown as well. And then we're going to get two examples in which The doubt along the path is honored, is completely natural, is understood as such, and uh, therefore the people who encounter it on the path, along the path, are able to overcome it as well. So, haven't you seen the one who argued with Ibrahim alayhi salam about his Rabb? An atahu Allahul mulk. As Allah had granted him kingdom. What was this argument based off of? It wasn't, on the face of it, it's an intellectual argument. It's reasoning. It's this case against that, or this argument against that, or this evidence, whatever. But an atahu Allahul mulk. What was vested is that his kingdom, he had stakes, and he felt that he stood to lose them, or they were threatened with what Ibrahim alayhi salam was advocating. If قال Ibrahim, when Ibrahim alayhi salam said, ربي الذي يحيي ويميت, my Rabb is the one who brings to life and puts to death. Right? So this biological process of life and death, where is this coming from? This is coming from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is in His control. قال أنا أحيي وأميت. His response, I bring to life. It's me. I can give death. قال Ibrahim, the demonstration that he gave. That he called out two prisoners condemned to death, let one of them go, put the other one to death. See, look at what I can do. Does that make me God? Or shouldn't that make me God? Or doesn't that justify my claim to being whatever sovereign that I'm claiming to be? قال إبراهيم فإن الله يأتي بالشمس من المشرق. Ibrahim alayhi salam doesn't argue with that. Doesn't argue with how where he's taking that. Just lets it be. He has them where he wants them. He says, fair enough, you want to play this? Is this how, if this is how you want to pursue this discussion, if these are your standards for how you're going to weigh out my reason, then I'll hold you to them. I am not going to contest them. His demonstration and his response to Ibrahim alayhi salam, Ibrahim alayhi salam says, fine, let's take those standards and move on. Allah is the one who brings the sun from the east. فَأْتِ بِهَا مِنَ الْمَغْرِبِ. So just make it rise from the west. فَبُهِتَ الَّذِي كَفَرَ. So the disbeliever was utterly defeated. This, again, the standard that he himself had set up in response to Ibrahim alayhi salam, he was not able to consistently maintain it and demonstrate as he had demonstrated in the prior contention that he made. Wallahu la yahdil qawm al-zalimin. And Allah does not guide such unjust people. أو كالذي مر على قرية. Or did you not reflect upon the one who passed by a town? So this example of Namrud, a tyrannical king, and how he subjects his reason in the direction or in the favor of his tyranny, and Ibrahim alayhi salam catches him short. The other example, that of Uzair alayhi salam, when he's passing by a town. أو كالذي مر على قرية وهي خاوية على عروشها. While it was fallen at its roots, so it was an utterly destroyed town, turned to rubble. قال أن يحيي هذه الله بعد موتها. And he exclaimed, it was like a natural reflex. You look at it and you wonder, how is it even possible? How will Allah revive this town after its death? This is not him being contentious. This is not being argumentative for the sake of it. This is genuinely wondering, how is it even possible? How does that work? فَأَمَاتَهُ اللَّهُ مِئَةَ عَامٍ. And so Allah demonstrated for him. Allah gave him that demonstration. Again, the importance of experience, the importance of demonstration, observation, being validated by the Quran as a source or as a means of reaching the truth. So فَأَمَاتَهُ اللَّهُ مِئَةَ عَامٍ. So Allah gave him death for 100 years. ثُمَّ بَعَثَ. And then He raised him to life again. قَالَ كَمْ لَبِثْتَ. And asked him, how long did you remain that way? قَالَ لَبِثْتُ يَوْمًا أَوْ بَعْضَ يَوْمٍ. He responded, maybe a day or less. قَالَ بَلْ لَبِثْتَ مِئَةَ عَامٍ. Allah responded, no, you stayed here for 100 years. فانظر إلى طعامك وشرابك لم يتسنى. Now have a look at your food and drink. It has not gone bad. It is not rotten. وانظر إلى حمارك. And look at your donkey. And as the Mufassirin explained, the donkey's bones had decayed. وَلِنَجْعَلَكَ آيَةً لِلنَّاسِ. And all this is to make you an ayah from mankind, a sign. وَانظُرْ إِلَى الْعِظَامِ. Now look at the bones. كَيْفَ نُنْشِزُهَا. How we assemble them. ثُمَّ نَكْسُوهَا لَحْمًا. Then we cover them with flesh. فَلَمَّا تَبَيَّنَ لَهُ. So when it became evident to him that this is how Allah brings the dead to life, قَالَ أَعْلَمُ أَنَّ اللَّهَ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ قَدِيرٌ. He said, now I know that Allah has, definitely for sure, He has the power over everything. So for what we learn from this is how, or again, the Mufassirin explain that what bones and assembly of the bones or putting the meat on the bones is being spoken of. He was made to see his donkey being brought back to life. And that's an ayah for him, and he becomes an ayah for the people. قال أعلم أن الله على كل شيء قدير وإذ قال إبراهيم. And when Ibrahim عليه السلام said ربي أرني كيف تحيي الموتى. My Rabb, how do you bring the dead to life? قال أولم تؤمن. Allah asks him, don't you believe? قال بلى. He said, I believe. ولكن ليطمئن قلبي. But I'm asking this for the itminan of my heart. So you can have belief and not be satisfied in your heart at the same time. قال فخذ أربعة من الطير. So Allah said, take 4 birds. فصرهن إليك. Commit them to yourself. ثم اجعل على كل جبل منهن جزءا. Then place a part of their flesh on each hilltop. Again, it is explained by Mufassirin that he was made to slaughter them and put pieces of them on different hilltops. Then call them back to you. يَأْتِينَكَ السَّعْيَا. They will come to you right away. وَاعْلَمْ أَنَّ اللَّهَ عَزِيزٌ حَكِيمٌ. Know that Allah is Aziz, Allah is Hakim. So this demonstration, this experience, this very natural request made by prophets to verify what they believe in, to show what is it or how is it that all of this comes about, and how they are shown the power of Allah through these. Now, for the most part, these incidents are looked upon as miracles that God performs for prophets to take them to higher levels of faith. However, there have been, as fringe as those opinions may be, that these are very natural experiences, that there wasn't anything quote unquote miraculous that took place. Either way, and as for the latter, we see that within the Quran itself, especially The ayats that are resorted to, or the ayats that are alluded to, are not of this supernatural uh, flavor, if you will. They're not, immediately watching a donkey, dead donkey, come back to life. The ayats that the Quran repeatedly refers to for a demonstration for us to observe and reflect are the biological, the physical, within the natural world, the routine and the mundane. To not just be able to see, and this is something that with the progression of humanity has become more and more possible, that with the advent of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, with the Quran, the the progression of humanity to be able to see the ayat and the divine hand within the mundane world, within the, the routine, natural world, your own routine life, within whatever is immediately in your vicinity, around you. Be able to reflect on that capacity increases. And so we see a less and less involvement of these supernatural events, these um, within with the progression in prophets as well, with as each subsequent prophet, ultimately with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, whereas in his life, and particularly um, in his campaign for Islam, or his prophethood, we do not see these miracles playing a primary part. We do have mentions of some here and there, but they're not the primary source of um, his ayat. His ayat are the one in the Quran, and the Quran referring to those that are accessible to everybody. But in any case, the experiences alluded to open up the recognition and realization, most importantly, the validation that the Quran gives through observation, experience, and coming to those conclusions. How the Quran, through the examples of prophets themselves, lets us know how it's completely human to have these doubts, or to have these questions, and to want to resolve them, not for the intention of argumentation, or just contention for the sake of it, but for as genuine inquiry, as really wanting to know. And we will see other examples of that within the Quran as well as we move on. مثل الذين ينفقون أموالهم في سبيل الله. So the examples of those who spend their wealth in the cause of Allah, كمثل حبة, is like a seed. أنبتت سبع سنابل, that sprouts and grows into 7 spikes. في كل سنبلة مئة حبة, in each spike there is 100 grains. Wallahu yudha'ifu liman yasha, and Allah gives multifold, multiplied over for whoever He wills. Wallahu wasi'un alim, and Allah is all encompassing, all knowing. So Iman, as it should translate into infaq, fi sabilillah, spending in the way of Allah. And again, all of where did it, before Ayatul Kursi, we saw how spending in the way of Allah was alluded to. And repeatedly within this surah, especially since the second part, we are seeing a constant exhortation of spending in the way of Allah, spending in the way of Allah, spending in the way of Allah. Here it picks up even more. From here all the way to the end of the surah, spending in the way of Allah is going to be uh, the most frequent exhortation. Spend, spend, spend. Towards what we've already spoken about. So again, how good is it to spend, that the what you get back from Allah is multiplied over. Is multiplied over. Yes, in terms of reward in the hereafter, for sure, but then the impact that this sort of a practice, when this becomes a norm in a community, the way the community will economically develop in the long run, that this multiplication or um, this growth, this stability that the community will develop, it is going to be such that it's it's it's, it's unparalleled. You won't see uh, anything like it. That apparently for your immediate interest, for your immediate gratification, it is very difficult to justify. I'm losing it. I'm giving money. It's gone. But in the long run, how it comes back as barakah, how it comes back to for the society to flourish. And then eventually, of course, that individual as a part of that society will somehow end up benefiting from that as well. And then ultimately in the hereafter itself, the reward that that generates. For that charity that you do, you die, but that the way that charity or that giving of yourself or from yourself to others, how the effects that it has even after your death, even after you're gone, even after you've forgotten what is it that you gave or how much of it, how much was it that you gave, it continues to produce the good. It continues, and the more um, self-replicating a charity is, the more good it inspires. Because it's not just that money and how the money goes from hand to hand and what it brings to people. It's what it inspires within people as an act of kindness, and how that trust in humanity, that there is goodness, how important that is for the welfare of the society, for the progression of human society in so many different ways. You can see how these spikes are growing. Acts of kindness are engendering acts of kindness. The khair that money brings, that is given to others, how it's spread out, the joy that is spread, the facilitation that it creates, the impact that it can possibly have. So Wallahu wasi'un alim. الَّذِينَ يُنْفِقُونَ أَمْوَالَهُمْ فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ. So those who spend their wealth in the cause of Allah, ثُمَّ لَا يُتْبِعُونَ مَا أَنْفَقُوا مَنًّا وَلَا أَذًى. Then they do not follow up what they have spent with reminders of the gift, neither looking to offend the feelings of the recipient. So even within this ultimately noble act of giving, of sharing, of kindness, there is a potential for evil. There is a potential for incredible evil. So we were engaging in this act as a way to ward off the potential of hypocrisy, but then there is an attitude through which even this becomes a source of reinforcing the hypocrisy. That when you are doing all of this with this sense of superiority, with this complex of how you are so much better, how you're so absolutely gifted in comparison to all these lesser people, and it reflects in your manner, in your attitude, in how you talk to them, in how the charity is followed up with patronizing them, with being condescending towards them. And if that's what charity becomes, even using the word charity, I'm conscious of how it is, it has now developed so many negative connotations. As noble as an act as it was, as virtuous as it should be, charity. I don't want to accept your charity. It's become a word of which carries negative implications. There's connotations of, it's not all that, it's not all that great. Because precisely our practice of charity has become such that it is, rather than using um, this as a means to purify ourselves and for developing a community, it has become a way of reinforcing our hypocrisy, reinforcing our superiority complex, our arrogance, and it socially manifests itself in making those stratifications within society more and more permanent. That the recipients of charity and charitable treatment are permanently excluded from the mainstream of society. That this institution of orphanages, of shelters, of refugee camps, and what have you, they're a constant source rather than becoming centers of empowerment. Even though there's money there, there's a lot of money there, but the attitude of arrogance that that money is accompanied with, reminders of the favor and the hurtfulness, is such that whoever is benefiting from that charity, whoever is economically improving in whatever way through that orphanage, shelter, or refugee camp, or whatever donation, they're also being permanently stigmatized. They're also being fixed, disempowered, that there is a curse that goes around with them. That in so many different ways, the society becomes such that you cannot expect a product of an orphanage or a shelter or a refugee camp to rise to positions of authority in the society, to grow, to become a significant voice in the society. That these the different handicaps that people have, the different difficulties that people have naturally or on account of accidents or whatever the case may be, we, through these institutions of charity, of patronizing charity, and I use patronizing in its negative connotation, condescending these people, condemning them to be absolutely defined as handicapped, that there is within their personality, within their lives, dimensions other than that handicap, that that handicap should not permanently define them, should not be a label that they wear that is just who they are and nothing else. We don't allow for the other dimensions within their personalities to really contribute within the society, to really benefit the society like they have the potential to benefit the society. And on top of that, the beauty within that particular handicap as well, that how it complements, how it allows for them to do something completely novel, which would otherwise not have been possible had they not been handicapped. See what I'm saying? So when a particular person has a deprivation, a weakness, whether that's being an orphan or a widow or a victim of abuse or any other physical handicap, deafness, blindness, physical disability in the form of an arm or a leg, or arms or an inability to walk, an inability to use their hands. We know there's learning disabilities, intellectual disabilities. To absolutely define them through those deprivations, through those handicaps, and not see that there is so much more to them through which they can positively contribute within the society, and not creating that room for them to positively contribute in the society, we preclude that possibility. We don't allow for that to happen because we have absolutely defined them. and made them dependent on a constant influx of charity, not looking to empower, a charity that doesn't empower, a charity that patronizes, a charity that condemns. But what should have been is that the other dimension, that being respected as human beings foremost, and then for all of what they can possibly offer to the society, given that room, given that space. And then what beauty their imperfections and deprivations and handicaps bring to the human community, to the society, to allow for that to bloom. That's the kind of that's the kind of charity you're looking for. That's the kind of institution of sadaqat you want to look for, you want to create. That's the community. Whereas our community is such that people are incredibly afraid that they will be found out for obvious imperfections or obvious handicaps, and how long it takes, that there will be active efforts that they would take to hide, that people shouldn't find out that I am inherently incapable of doing A, B, or C. People shouldn't find out, because the moment they find out, I am a victim of abuse and exploitation, I am going to be looked at as somebody inherently incapable and flawed and incapable of contributing anything positive in the society. And that is going to define me. And then, because that is how the society defines them, they will define themselves like that as well, and victimize, and not look at themselves in any other way either. It becomes all the more difficult for them to manifest the greatness of their potential because of a constant influx of abuse that looks at them as nothing else. It becomes incredibly difficult, not impossible, for them to identify it as more than their diagnosis or the disease or the handicap or whatever social label they've been stricken with. And things go from bad to worse. And really, who is it? Who is it that doesn't have a deprivation, that doesn't have a handicap, that doesn't have, in some way or the other, or won't have if they don't already have, some sort of an imperfection? So with what God complex do we condemn, do we look down upon, and do we fix these absolute labels to keep people down and not rise to their meaningful potential for the community? What sort of a God complex do we have? What kind of Nimrods do we think we are? I give life and I give death. Who the hell do we think we are? لَهُمْ أَجْرُهُمْ عِنْدَ رَبِّهِمْ. So the people who really genuinely give in the way of Allah, and the way of Allah is the way of empowerment. The way of Allah is the way of justice. The way of Allah is the way of accepting people for who they are and looking to bring the best out of what they're capable of. That's the way of Allah. To make a community that in which that's the norm, that's the standard. And be very fair, over the past couple of centuries, the Eastern communities or the Muslim communities have regressed in this dimension. The more liberal or the more Western have progressed in this dimension, where you will find people who spent a good part of their lives in refugee camps and orphanages and foster homes to become doctors, engineers, members of the parliament, congressmen and congresswomen in the West. But you will be hard pressed to find any parallel examples within the Muslim communities. And so, in that sense, closer to Tawheed and closer to a principle of scripture are those apparently liberal, secular, and ascriptural or anti scriptural or whatever labels we affix to the Western communities as being the Darul Kufr. The Darul Kufr being so much more of a community than the Darul Islam, apparently. So الذين ينفقون أموالهم في سبيل الله, those who spend their wealth in the cause of Allah, ثم لا يتبعون ما أنفقوا منا ولا أذى, then they do not follow up what they have spent with reminders of the gift, neither do they offend the feelings of the recipient. As important as it is to give, it is all the more important to respect and honor. And what is a principle in an individual interaction is what should be the norm in a scriptural community. لهم أجرهم عند ربهم. For them, their reward is reserved with their Rabb. ولا خوف عليهم ولا هم يحزنون. They have nothing to fear, nor would they regret. قول معروف ومغفرة خير. Kind speech and forgiveness are better than صدقة يتبعها أذى, than a charity followed by hurt. Good words, respectful words. And why maghfiratun? Because it is quite a possibility that with these stratifications in society, those who are deserving of charity, they will offend you as well. They will carry resentment in their hearts as well. And they will retaliate and they may transgress and they may be very offensive towards you for who you are as this privileged class. And so all the more important to recognize maghfirah, forgiveness, as being better. من صدقة يتبعها أذى, then a charity followed by hurt. Wallahu ghaniyun halim, and Allah is ghani and forbearing. Again, embodying the attributes of Allah. Allah tells the people of Iman to do all of this, and then concludes with how doing this would be a reflection of who He is, as ghani and forbearing. He gives looking to empower. He gives not looking to permanently subjugate, but elevate. And in that process, the one that He is looking to elevate is transgressing, is being hurtful, and He's okay with that. He's Halim. Is being incredibly doubtful, is being rebellious. He's Halim. He lets all of that go. He's like, okay, keep going, keep going, keep coming, keep coming, keep coming. Allah is Ghani and He's looking to empower. Allah is Halim, He's looking to forego. Let it be, it's okay. You don't have to take everybody to task for every little thing. That's not the way of empowerment. That's not the way of nurturing. That's not the way of bringing people out of the confinements of these rigid stratifications. That's not the way of Allah. That's not fi sabilillah. And so implicit in all of those ayats, Ayat al-Kursi onwards and other ayat talking about the attributes of Allah, the answer to that why that we said, why should you do this? Why should you suffer, struggle, give, pain, the whole whys that we asked? And we said, because Allah is Ilah. And we said, because you have a free choice. We said all of that. A free choice for the sake of that Ilah, because that Ilah wants to empower you to become more like him in this istighna, in this hilm that he wants you to embody. Let that sink in. What makes it all worth it is that you become closer and closer to him. What does it mean to be closer and closer to him? To be more and more like him in his attributes of goodness, of beauty, and power. So if this is your conception of who he is with you, then that will naturally become your religious expression in how you are with others. Our conduct with people is necessarily a reflection of what we believe about God. If that belief is correct, character would be beautiful. The results will be good. If that belief is corrupt, incorrect, the character will be ugly. The results would be corruption. Whether the claim is that there's no belief in God whatsoever, whether the claim is that there is this belief about God, that claim in its own place, it has its importance, of course. What is reflected is what is actually believed. And they have to be so much more careful about what that is. And it's a continuous process of monitoring your behavior, reflecting over your conduct, disciplining it, appropriating it, improving it, adorning it, so that the conception improves as well. And then constantly working on the conception as well so that it naturally reflects within the conduct. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, you who have believed, la tubtilu sadaqatikum. Do not make your charities worthless bil man, by conferring that favor upon people by reminders of your generosity. Look at how much I gave you. Look at how much I've done for you. Look at how much I've done for society. Well, other, and by hurtfulness, by hurting their feelings, by hurting their chances, by hurting their humanity and your community eventually. The one who spends his wealth only to be seen by people. They do not believe in Allah and the Yawm al-Akhir, the way Allah and Yawm al-Akhir are presented in the Quran. Whatever, they may claim to believe in Allah and Yawm al-Akhir, whatever. فَمَثَلُهُ كَمَثَلِ صَفْوَانٍ عَلَيْهِ تُرَابٍ. His example is that of a hard barren rock covered with a thin layer of soil. فَأَصَابَهُ وَابِلٌ فَتَرَكَهُ صَلْدًا. Then a rainstorm hits it and turns it to a bare rock. وَلَا يَقْدِرُونَ عَلَى شَيْءٍ مِمَّا كَسَبُوا. And they're unable to keep anything of what they've earned. Nothing. That charity had zilch of an impact. Nothing of an impact on their personalities. And also in the society. That charity is worthless. It is as if it never happened. It was a layer, a facade that a little bit of rain took away. But what is that rain? The rain, as an analogy in the Quran, can be looked at in one of two ways. Many others perhaps, but just two particular ones to consider right now. The ayat of Allah are rain. The ayat of Allah are rain. Also, challenges and difficulties is rain. We read in the very beginning of Surah Al-Baqarah, the thunderstorm. So the rain as knowledge, as ayat of Allah, as ayat of revelation, and other ayat, when you've tilled the land of your heart, by these acts of charity, and the community is tilled, the land has been prepared, and then the ayat of Allah bring the best out of that human being and the best out of that community, because it's ready. It's the selflessness, the self-transcendence, the willingness to empower the other, the willingness to extend yourselves to the other. That willingness is there. So that the moment truth comes, there's bloom, there's flowers, there's greenery. Similarly, when difficulty or suffering comes, and there's that extending towards the other, there's that self transcendence, then in moments of suffering, the community turns out to be even stronger than what it was before. The individual personality turns out to be even stronger than what it was before. But if that's not the case, if it's all a facade, a show, and rains just wipes that layer off. It can't face the truth. It can't stand a tribulation. Oh, it's gone. لا يقدرون على شيء مما كسبوا. And they're unable to keep anything of what they've earned. It's like it had no impact on their personalities. والله لا يهدي القوم الكافرين. Allah does not guide such ungrateful people or such um, people who reject the way they do. I did. Okay. والله لا يهدي القوم الكافرين. Allah does not guide such ungrateful people. ومثل الذين ينفقون أموالهم ابتغاء مرضات الله. An example of those who spread their wealth, spend it out in pursuit of the pleasure of Allah, but تثبيتا من أنفسهم, and out of a strong conviction from within themselves. كمثل حبة بربوة, like a garden in a higher level of earth. أصابها وابل, if a heavy rain falls on it, again, either truth or tribulation. فآتت أكلها ضعفين, it will bring its fruit in double increase. فإن لم يصبها وابل, even if it does not get a heavy rain, even a drizzle, فطل, a simple, a light drizzle, that's enough as well. Wallahu bima ta'maluna basir. Allah sees whatever you do. You will see that effort bear fruit, whatever follows that effort, for the individual personality or the community, in the form of truth, ayat of Allah, or in the form of tribulation. And usually the two come hand in hand. أيود أحدكم, would any of you like أن تكون له جنة من نخيل وأعناب, that he has a garden of date palms and grapevines, تجري من تحتها الأنهار, underneath which rivers flow, له فيها من كل الثمرات, and there are all kinds of fruits for him therein, وأصابه الكبر, but he has become old, وله ذرية ضعفاء, and he has weak young children. فأصابها إعصار فيه نار فاحترقت. It is struck by a fiery whirlwind, burning it down. كذلك يبين الله لكم الآيات. This is the way Allah makes the ayat clear to you. لعلكم تتفكرون, so that you may reflect. So that you may reflect. Again, everything in this analogy, the fruit, the yard, the grapevines, the flowing river. You have everything at your disposal for a continuation of a legacy, of a community, for something to leave behind. But despite having it, you can lose all of it. None of it can be taken for granted. Effort has to be put in. Effort has to be put in for it to be sustained, for it to really give what it's capable of giving and to continue to give it. A river as that source of for it to be able to replenish all of the fruits as they're used up. And the children, for them to be capable, powerful, empowered to carry it on. That legacy continues. And how an incredibly selfish person may have all of that, whether that's spiritual wealth or spiritual endowment or blessing from Allah, it's knowledge, it's actual wealth, to not give out, to not look for it to benefit others outside of yourself, you're pretty much setting up yourself for when you're going to be most in need in your old age, and your children, your future generations, to suffer as a consequence. To suffer as a consequence. So, for this practice of community building, so you have something for your old age, for when you're most dependent, and your future generations who really are dependent, because they're going to have to carry the burden of your sins, of your selfishness. And that might make them more selfish, and the vicious cycle continues. To break free of that for the choice that you do have, and to look to empower and to give, and really whatever good we do enjoy that we have in society today is because people in the past were willing to do that, and they did do that. We're carrying the burdens of a lot of other people as well who didn't do that. And our choice to either continue to do that or do more of that, to break these cycles of suffering and to continue and perpetuate and increase the cycles of good, is going to ensure that what we have, our children have it as well. We have luxuries today because of such people of infaq, such people of giving in our past. And these luxuries, which are the norm for us, our children will not have if we don't look to carry on this legacy of infaq fi sabilillah, or spending in the way of Allah. وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. So we begin with Dr. Asma's question foremost. The third part, I'll just go over all three. Ilah as him being the most worthy of love and all his attributes of beauty uh, follow from there. Or love as ibadah, or ibadah as love, right? Second, ilah as the one most worthy of trust and reliance, and so him being the focus of tawakkul and all his attributes of power, his jalal over there. The third one, him as the ultimate source of meaning, of how he makes everything meaningful. And there, all his attributes of truth, justice, they come in. And just the way his Jamal and all his attributes of Jamal um, necessitate, or they lead towards ibadah, love as ibadah, and his attributes of Jalal necessitate tawakkul, reliance, dua, and his attributes of truth and justice, they necessitate the struggle, right? So in these, at least these three ways is how I understand Ila. I hope that made sense. Okay. So moving right along, we were speaking about I believe this is from the passage, the second ruku of Surah Al-Baqarah, when we spoke about self-interest being the driving force for yeah, hypocrisy, right? And carrying it forward from there isn't saving yourself from the hellfire. Similarly, a manifestation of self-interest, and shouldn't that also be demonic? Now, when we speak about self-interest, when we speak about being selfish, then there's degrees of being selfish. There is degrees of being selfish in that I am incredibly selfish, excessively selfish, when I want everything here and now for my immediate gratification. The more I am able to push the the gratification further, the more distant the gratification, the more delayed is probably the better word, the gratification is, the less self centered it is. And the more room it creates for others as well, right? So for a child to learn how to share is a very incredible achievement. They want that toy immediately, here and now, for themselves, not for anybody else. But in order to evade the punishment of their parent, or in order to earn friendship in the long run, they're able to share, delay the gratification of having the toy immediately, avoid that conflict, and earn a friend, and then the friend will share with them, and they will have somebody to chill out with, yada, yada, yada. The further the the further this becomes, the more we're willing to delay. The more we're willing to delay, the more we're willing to accommodate others, the more we're looking to benefit others. And as we have seen, this sort of self transcendence eventually does benefit the self. But if its sole aim is only to benefit itself, then it does fall flat on its face and it is not capable of um, even benefiting itself, right? It's the as desperately as we cling on to self-interest, that is what leads to self-destruction and self-harm. The more we're willing to let go, the further, the more we're willing to delay that gratification, delay it for a day, a week, or as you're growing and the scope of your contributions is increasing, delaying all the way to the hereafter. Now, that delay entails a lot of faith as well, more and more faith. Even within that child sharing, there's a faith that if I share, I have faith or I trust that this person is going to be my friend tomorrow or day after, and we're going to be good friends, right? There's a trust, but there's also a risk. With immediate gratification, there's no risk. Now, when the delay is so much that it's like, okay, the reward for this is in the hereafter, is in escaping not from the punishment of my parent, but from the punishment of God, from the punishment of hellfire, and the form of paradise. Now, the greater the delay, the more the faith, the greater the risk you're willing to take. And along with that, there is a greater possibility of others being accommodated here in the space that that delay has created. And then, yes, there is self transcendence, um, which extends beyond reward and punishment in the hereafter. There is that as well. There is that level that people attain to. Quite simply put, and it's really incredible that how sensitive and incredibly almost dangerous subjects of discussion are reflected so beautifully and simply in the life of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam when Hazrat Bilal radiallahu ta'ala anhu is perturbed to see Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam so distressed and so like crying in prayer and not sleeping and all of that. And he asks him, Ya Rasulullah, everything past and future has been forgiven for you. Why now? Why do you have to do this now? Should I not be grateful? He says. He is going to be in the highest place in paradise. Sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Yet that doesn't make him complacent. That makes him go above and beyond. Um, that makes him go above and beyond. And there's people who you can find examples of how people would risk for all the best that they can understand of the hereafter, of reward and punishment, but they would put that on the line, risk that for how much benefit it would bring to others, whatever choice they have to make. And again, dangerous area or territory to tread into, but oh well. Abu Talib, in the choice that he makes, how, for all of what we can tell, his not accepting Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam even on his deathbed is catastrophic from the perspective of hereafter, a huge, huge problem there. Hereafter, hellfire, paradise. But then the positive impact that it has on the cause of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That the testimony that Abu Talib gives by supporting Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, despite remaining true to his tradition and his forefathers, is the greatest slap across the face of the rest of the Quraysh who are criticizing Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam precisely on the issue of being true to their forefathers. Abu Talib comes from that same camp of holding forefathers in high esteem and says that that's completely compatible with supporting Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the way he did. I can't find another example which is And, you know, that's not the kind of stuff you advocate either. So I hope somewhat, and then we find examples, right, in our historical tradition. Rabia Basri, rahimahullah, she's going to put out the hellfire. She wants to set paradise on fire so that people love Allah because He just deserves it. He's just worth it. Okay, so I hope that somewhat answers that question. Um, moving right along. Second question. Okay, how is Aulade Adam destined to fall? Given the legend of the fall, given the fourth ruku of Surah Baqarah, um, as far as we can read from the 7 times this incident is brought up within the Quran, and everything else that we know, um, the fall is not a condemnation. The fall is the the most meaningful event, the first act of human freedom, and necessary for the rise of humanity. The human being, prior to the fall, whatever paradise that was, the human being deserved better. But to get what they deserved, potentially, the process of life on earth is necessary. And the rise after this fall is not to the same pre prostration or, that Adamic paradise. The paradise after the fall is a Muhammadan paradise. Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Without the fall, there is no appreciation of self, of God, and even of paradise itself. Even of paradise itself, right? जचते नहीं बख्शे हुए फिरदौस नजर में जन्नत तेरी पिन्हा है खूने जिगर में और तेरे खूने जिगर में वो बख्शे हुए फिरदौस that doesn't suit you. Your paradise is in your struggle, and that's what you deserve, and that's what Allah deserves. You're both worthy of it. Okay, so to look at the fall as a condemnation and the efforts in dunya as this vile, torturous um, rehab, this correction facility to from which we have to attain freedom to reclaim that paradise. No, thank you. No, thank you. That kind of condemnation of dunya, that kind of demonization of dunya, it doesn't fit, and of human effort and of the human being. And if That's how vile the world, the human being, and human effort ultimately turns out to be. What does that say of God, who is the Rabb of all of this? All right, moving right along. Next question. Thank you. Okay. Um, so, in contrast with the hypocrites, inherent motivation being self-interest, in contrast with the with the hypocrites, inherent motivation being self-interest, self-transcendence would require sacrifice. Can self-transcendence sacrificial acts also become pathological? Thank you for asking this question. Um, and that's the part that I didn't highlight, nor not explicitly at least. When we talk about self transcendence, and if we absolutize self transcendence and it's important, then that ends up being monasticism. That ends up being asceticism. And we have repeatedly spoken about how that asceticism and that monasticism is discouraged, criticized, disapproved within the Quran. That the Quran does not advocate for you to sacrifice that which you cannot sustain. The Quran does not demand of the human being self annihilation. There is a difference between self transcendence and self annihilation. If you do not regard self interest, if you do not regard the self, then you have nothing to give. You have nothing to give from. You have nothing to give of. So, self interest is incredibly integral as a prerequisite for self transcendence. If you don't take care of yourself, your own needs, your own wants, then whatever it is that you have to give, it's not going to last and it's going to be very little, right? So, um, what self transcendence does is that it honors self interest. What Iman does, or what Tawheed does, it makes even pursuits of self interests, selfish acts, self serving acts, pleasurable acts, acts of attaining power, acts of attaining wealth. It honors them, it makes them meaningful. They become meaningful pursuits precisely because there is no self transcendence without them. Okay, so thank you for asking that question. Right. Um, moving right along. Which translation is being referred to? Oh, yeah, I said that there's a story behind it. I don't think this translation question was specific to any portion of what we were talking about. I feel it was more general. Am I right? Um, okay, so when I did this or started doing this back in 2012, um, there's a technical issue with doing this kind of a program or this kind of a format. When you're reciting an ayah and then you're translating or reading the translation, to know that the translation, especially when you're doing it for the very first time, is of the portion that you've read, it is pretty straightforward when you're reading an Urdu mushaf or an Arabic mushaf with Urdu translation. Okay, that's pretty straightforward. The phrase is on top, and because both Arabic and Urdu are right to left, So whatever that Urdu phrase or Urdu sentence is referring to is usually immediately above that line, and the ayah is going to be immediately above that. When you're using an English translation and you're doing it for the first time, especially, and even if you're not doing it for the first time, you're doing the entire cover to cover, right? There's going to be very complicated ayat and sentences, and you do tend to get lost in long ayats with long passages as translations. Which part specifically refers to which portion of the ayah? It's difficult to tell, especially since within the translation there's also already an interpretation and explanation that is present. And since the Arabic and English translations are side to side, they're not, um, because there's no right to left in English, right? It's left to right. So they're on the opposing sides of the page. It is difficult to correspond. And since you have to do it very quickly, you're doing a juz or more than a juz in one night for this sort of a program, the requirement was a sort of translation which the ayah or the portion of the ayah and the portion of the translation, easy to see which portion is corresponding to which, is top to bottom. So if I can show you, some of you, whoever's going to be watching or the Zoom recording or the Zoom, um, this is what my translation looks like, right? So it's top and bottom. Um, since this was, for me, the motivation for me to do this came from Dr. Abdul Sami, who was my teacher at that time, and he's like, "Do it." I'm like, "I can't do it." He's like, "No, no, no, you can." I'm like, "No, no, no, I can." Whatever that back and forth was, eventually he's like, "This is the translation that I've done for," because he had earlier done this program in English. For those of you who don't know, this was an initiative that Dr. Israr Ahmed took. I think it was 1986, 87, late 1980s is when he took this initiative where he said that I'm going to do a program with Taraweeh in which all of what is recited is going to be translated and explained. And people are like, "You're crazy. Who's going to watch it? Who's going to listen to you? Who's going to stay back? People want to just get the Taraweeh over and done with and leave." He's like, "No, no, no, no. I want people to understand." And it's become a movement, um, 30 years down the road. And there's a lot of people doing it now. And those who can't do the whole thing are at least doing summaries. Um, so this is where it came from. But of course, again, it was in Urdu, and then the initiative to do this in English, Dr. Abdul Sami did that, and he, for the reason of this program, he had to prepare a document in which this sort of a translation was there. And so he started the process of translation. And he consulted whatever English translations he had at his disposal and whatever Urdu translations he had at his disposal and explanations in order to come up with this translation. And so when he said, "Just do it," I'm like, "How can I do it?" He's like, "Here you go. All you have to do is read out." I'm like, "Okay, all I have to do is read out." And he handed me all the documents, all the Word documents with all the typos. And well, his expression of English is very different. It's in accordance with his times, and that's not how I speak. That's not the kind of English the English speaking audience or listening audience is used to. So there was a lot of room in that translation for an upgrade. And now I couldn't do that upgrade on my own. So what I did was that I consulted whatever English translations I had at my disposal, whatever Urdu translations and explanations I had at my disposal, access to and understanding of at that time. This is back in 2012. And mostly the resource that I followed the was Dr. Israr Ahmed, his recording of, I think that recording was from 1998, of the program that he'd done in, I think it was Karachi, and it was with Taraweeh. It was the whole, what is popularly known as the Bayan al-Quran, and you'll find the CDs for that and the recordings for that under that name. So I used that. The English translations that I used were the Sahih International, um, and Alama Muhammad Asad's Message of the Quran. These were the two main ones, and along with, of course, the Dr. Israr Ahmad one. And then, of course, I used Urdu translations as well. Um, yeah, so that's the story. I did use a little bit of Mohsen Khan, a little bit of Marmaduke Picatal. Picatal, I think that's how you pronounce his name. And yeah, those are the main ones. Perhaps a few here and there where the expression wouldn't make sense. So, and yes, what I would do after that, and what has been going on over the past 8, 9 years, um, whatever concept or explanation that I've understood from another source of explanation, I would incorporate that as best as I could within the original documents that we prepared. And um, the most I would do from myself, if it didn't come from an understanding or a concept that I'd picked up from here or there, or you guys know what my sources are, or they have been for the past couple of years, especially. Um, what I would do is I would just make the word more relatable. So I don't think, for example, most people will be able to relate with foolish. You don't really use that much. They're more likely to find idiot relatable. Um, Similarly, I forget what usual translations. How do they translate whale? Wailul lahum. So I just say, damn them. Woe to them. Woe to those. Woe, I mean, you're translating. You're supposed to make it more relatable. You're just making it more obscure. You're using words that people don't speak. So first you translate, and then you translate your translation. So I just said, damn them. Damn it. Right? These are words we know, we hear. So that's the most that I would have done. And of course, the past couple of years specifically, my studying with Dr. Basit Koshal, and through him, the understanding of Iqbal, they have informed conceptually as well. So you will find that mostly in the explanation, um, not really in the translation. So that's the story of where the translation. So yeah, that's that. So the documents I have right now are they have those translations, and they have most of my notes. So when I'm preparing yesterday, for example, for today, I will try to go over most of what I'm supposed to talk about today. I'll review what I have in my notes, and if there's some other insight that can be shared, something that can be simplified further, explained in a different way, I would just add that to my notes, a quote here or there. So it's a work in progress. It's a work in progress. Okay, chale. And the translation be shared depends on who's asking. You can say to that. Moving right along, the last question of the day. Divorce is something in which both parties, or at least one, has gone through some huge emotional or psychological damage. So how in that case is it possible to part ways beautifully when the separation happened due to conflicts, arguments, etc.? Um, Same principle. عسى أن تكرهوا شيئا وهو خير لكم وعسى أن تحبوا شيئا وهو شر لكم. So it may well be that you dislike something and it's good for you, and it may well be that you like something and it's bad for you. So emotionally, with all that damage that has happened, the pain and the distress that you have undergone in such a process, one would be inclined towards even rationalizing that no, no, no. In my case, a beautiful divorce is not called for. I am completely justified in making it completely ugly or retaliating. And it does become challenging, especially, of course, if the other person has absolutely no inclination towards keeping it beautiful. Um, then it becomes all the more difficult, but nevertheless, that's a greater challenge. But the greater the challenge, the greater the polarity between what you want to do and what you have to do, and ability to overcome that polarity or do what you have to do despite what you want to do, um, being able to sustain that and being able to um, meaningfully overcome that is going to be the difference between growing and not growing in that whole scenario, right? And sometimes, yes, it is unsustainable. We do hope to Allah for that to be forgivable. It is definitely forgivable. We ask for His forgiveness throughout the whole process, but nevertheless, the ideal remains, right? So I hope that answers at least some of the questions that most of you put in. If there are any others, or if there's further clarification required on what you already asked, please feel free. If not, then we conclude. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين.